everybody, welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a sin, and hope you're doing well, and today we're doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Barbie get all the way to $775 million at the global box office, meaning that the film getting to $1 billion is essentially guaranteed, and probably will reach $1 billion by the way it's pacing within the next week or so, if I had to guess. The big question now is going to be how much past $1 billion does the film actually get? All of this while Oppenheimer, a part of the Barbenheimer effect, is getting closer to $400+ million and crossing $400 million, and is likely going to end somewhere around $700 million or so by the end of its run, based on the metrics and based on the holds that we are seeing right now. So clearly the Barbenheimer effect is indeed in full effect, and it is doing very well, and it seems to be crowding out the brand new Disney flick, Haunted Mansion, which I've heard mixed things about, but hey, in today's marketplace, you know that if you have mixed word about a movie, tends to not work out all that well for it, and when it comes to Disney, couldn't happen to a nicer company. Before we go any further though, please make sure you smash that like button, let that 5 button Aussie, and smash the rumble button. And also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know every time a video, a live stream, goes live on the channel. So good old Nance over at Deadline. Tony apparently has not updated his article, at the very least as recording of this video, since last night. This is very odd that Tony has not gotten up to be able to get this updated for the domestic box office, but we do have the international word coming out from Nance. As it says right there, Barbie has pirouetted to a powerhouse $775 million global as Oppenheimer reaches $400 million. So again, very impressive numbers down the line here. As it says, Warner Brothers Barbie continued to show its prowess this weekend worldwide, riding a wave of hot pink fun, savvy marketing, and a sincere message to a powerful 774.5 global start through Sunday. Now, I can just, clearly point out the fact that that is complete and utter bunk, at least the part about having a sincerely powerful message. If by sincerely powerful message you mean radical third, fourth wave feminist message, then sure, you could say that, but let's just be honest here. It has a lot more to do with the marketing of the movie and also the fact that apparently pink things are able to distract enough people to have them go out to see a film more than once. And again, if that's your thing, go right ahead and do it. But you can't just make up your own truth about what the actual movie is, because it is nothing more than radical third wave, fourth wave feminism. But I digress. The offshore take of this session was $122.2 million in 69 markets, just 32% off from its opening. So it only dropped 32% internationally, only dropping around 43% domestically. What does that mean? It means this film is seeing incredibly strong holds in both the domestic and international box office, which is why we're going to see this film easily get to $1 billion probably by the end of next week, if not before. And why I think that this film could get, definitely at the very least, give a film like the Super Mario Brothers film a run for its money. Right now, Super Mario Brothers film is the highest grossing film of this year, getting around, $1.5 billion. This film has a chance to be able to get to the same amount of money. If the film has these similar holds, right, and we'll go into the charting in just a few minutes, but if it has the similar holds that it's having right now, then you're starting to look at this film being able to double what it's made so far. Whether it does that or not is anyone's guess. We still have to wait and see what the numbers end up being over the long term. But at least after the first couple of weeks of release, this film is holding incredibly strong. As it says right here, overseas, the Greta Gerwig directed pick. And Greta Gerwig, that is a key factor as to understanding the actual concept of this film. Apparently, a lot of people don't know a lot about Greta Gerwig's other movies, which tell you a lot more about what she's trying to do in this film. But again, I digress. It's number one slot in 57 markets with exceptional holds in numerous markets, including Taiwan, where it went up 37%. Germany went up 29%. Hong Kong up 19%. Holland up 11%. So you can see it's increasing even in places like China, and only dropping 32% in the UK, where it's also doing very well. Shows you just the current state of this actual film. Going to thenumbers.com, we go ahead and look at these numbers right here. And of course, I decided to click on the wrong button because that is just going to be how things go. Let's see if just refreshing it will end up being a lot better. Numbers has gotten a lot more traffic recently, and we always all know we like to do things live here on the channel, but with this heavier traffic, it means that sometimes you've gotten these things where there's error messages trying to log into the site because there is so much traffic going on, amongst other things. I say that, and yet the numbers still has not actually updated with this amount of money. So let's go ahead and go into the international numbers then at this time. Barbie making $351 million domestically at this point in time, and over $400 million internationally, brings its entire total to $774 million. Now remember, this film only cost around $100 million to make, meaning this film is not only already profitable, it's already making hundreds of millions in net gain profits. So this is a huge win for Warner Brothers, and Lord knows, of all the studios, Warner Brothers and Disney need the biggest wins, Disney is continuing to see massive losses. Warner Brothers, it seems, finally has a hit on its hands. However, it's not going to be nearly as much of a hit for them because they will have to be splitting these box office profits with Mattel. And I'm not sure if it's a 50-50 split. I would imagine it would be something close to that if I had to guess. And that would mean then that, yes, they will still see a lot of money coming from it. It probably won't be able to make up the massive losses that they've had from other films coming out this year, especially movies like The Flash and upcoming films like Blue Beetle. But still, Barbie doing very well. Let's see if the numbers has actually updated at this point in time. It looks like it has. It looks like I just need to click on that button. Boom. There we go. So Barbie at $93 million, only a 43% drop from its first to second week, so that's an incredibly strong hold. Also adding 94 screens. Oppenheimer clearly also being impacted by this as well, right? The Barbenheimer effect is real. Look at those drops. 43% drop for Barbie and only 44% drop for Oppenheimer. It's more impressive for Oppenheimer, to be perfectly frank, because it's a 3-hour drama. Right, it makes sense that you would have a film like Barbie that, with the kind of marketing that it's had, that it's going to be driving out, especially that hardcore female demographic. But with Oppenheimer, the fact that it's getting helped by this, and we can see that in the actual numbers and the actual percentage holds, is very impressive. And so, hey, kudos to them for being able to actually pull that off, and for the internet for creating the whole Barbenheimer meme, because I think it's definitely had a huge impact on helping. Obviously, we know Christopher Nolan is pretty popular when it comes to films, but his films are not always guaranteed to be massive hits. And when it comes to Oppenheimer, it suffers from a lot of the same faults that his other films, especially more recent films, have suffered from, but apparently that effect has still helped it nonetheless. This film getting now $174 million domestically. So whereas Barbie is going to make well over $1 billion, Oppenheimer is going to make well over $500 million, and that is just good news all the way around for that movie. Not so much good news for Haunted Mansion. So even though the $24.2 million that Haunted Mansion has made so far is probably better than what anyone would have expected this film to make at this point, especially up against Barbenheimer, it's still not good enough. The movie still cost a whopping $150 million. It's still a franchise film that no one asked for. No one wanted a remake or a redo or a do-over of the old school film they did back in the early 2000s, where you had, again, it just honestly is good. Had the Eddie Murphy film, and no one, I think, was ever asking for this to be done ever again. And even though I have heard some mixed things about it, some people saying it was a lot of fun, it was not offensive, I haven't heard a lot more people saying, oh, I want to see this film more than once. We're seeing that with Barbie. I think we're definitely seeing that even with Oppenheimer, which is, again, more impressive because of that 3-hour runtime and the fact that it's a drama versus the, so-called comedy slash, actually, it's funny because the list that they give over at the numbers listed as an F-rated movie because it is a female-led or a female-directed film. So I think it's because of those factors that you see that film doing as well as it is, and again, makes sense. Whereas Oppenheimer, really, I think the Barbenheimer effect is having a much stronger impact on this movie than whereas Barbie. Barbie, I think, would have done well regardless of any of that. Whereas Oppenheimer, I think, is benefiting quite a bit from this. Not saying that it would have done poorly, but just it's doing, I think, a lot better than what many people would have expected. Haunted Mansion, though, not looking very good at this point in time. Sound of Freedom is continuing, though, to do very well, dropping from the number 3 spot last week, but still in the top 4. This film has been out for 4 weeks and is beating out the likes of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. However, I do have more information on that film in just a second. But Sound of Freedom added 126 screens and still held 37%. So you're seeing incredibly strong holds for this movie. You're seeing the film make well over $1 million a day in many cases. I think it's actually been above $3 million a day for the last 4 weeks or so, which explains why the film has been able to get as much money as it has. The film will easily cross $150 million probably by the end of day on Monday, and I would not be surprised to see this film end its domestic run somewhere closer to $200 million. Add to that, it will be getting an international release in various countries starting this month, starting in the month of August and going into the month of September, and it'll be interesting to see where those films and how those films do in those countries. We're talking about countries that are not known for being massive moneymakers, and so don't expect the film to be bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars from other markets. But the fact that it's doing as well as it is, and the fact that you're looking at this film not costing a whole lot of money, let alone from Angel Studios as a distributor or the director, who I actually was listening the other day, and apparently it was not Angel Studios that bought the rights necessarily outright from Disney, but it was the director who got the rights back to his movie and then worked with Angel Studios. And so either way, you're looking at both of these entities, Angel Studios and the director of the film, getting a lot of money from this, and kudos to them because they did a great job. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Still a massive and insane title. But I want to just point something out here because this is still actually much more impressive than I think some people might actually recognize, because the first thing that people are going to look at is it dropped from 1,130 screens. All right, that's bad. That's really bad. When you're 3 weeks out from your initial release and Paramount is pulling it from over 1,000 screens, that's pretty bad. What's impressive, though, is that it got pulled from 1,000 screens and only dropped 45%. I don't think people recognize just how impressive that is, because if you have a movie that's being pulled from thousands of screens, thousands of theaters, and you are still able to hold below 50%, that shows that there are still a lot of people that are interested in this film. I think that there are some. I know that Valiant Renegade, shout out to him, has mentioned saying, hey, this is going to be much more of a long-term game for this movie. Mission Impossible as a franchise has always legged out. There's always been long-term gains for the film, and we are actually seeing that to a much better degree, to a much stronger degree in the international box office. Personally, I don't think it's going to be enough to be able to make up its money, right? I'm not talking about this film legging out to, make well over $600-700 million worldwide, or that would even be guaranteed. But what I am saying is that I think these numbers are going to actually come in a lot better than what the numbers right now seem to indicate. And I think a big part of that, and a big indicator of that, is the strong hold, despite the fact that it lost 1,000 screens. I mean, keep in mind, if it had kept all of those screens there, you probably would have seen a much stronger hold than even that 45%. So could this be that those people that were going to see Sound of Freedom in droves are now going to see this movie? It's possible. I really haven't seen too much of that crossover effect, but again, who knows at this point in time? I still think Paramount messed up its release schedule with the way it released it early, and I think that's probably been the biggest negative impact on the film, because Lord knows it's not the marketing, and Lord knows it's not the film itself. The film has gotten tons of praise, has gotten huge word of mouth, positive word of mouth campaigns, and so I think that that's why it will probably end up doing a lot better than what other films would be doing at the same time with the same amount of money. Regardless, it's not doing nearly as well as it needs to, and it does, I think, leave some doubt about what the next film, Part 2, is going to do, especially if that film ends up getting delayed further than what it already has been, as it was supposed to be getting released next summer, and obviously with the writer and actor strike, those are now kind of up in the air. We also have the number 6 movie this week, Talk to Me, from A24. This film having very impressive per theater ratios there, 2,300 screens from A24. Hey, good job, A24. You were actually able to get a movie out in a larger portion of screens and a larger portion of theaters instead of your weird attempt to release it in 10 theaters and then 20 theaters and then whatever. Again, it's worked for some movies in the past, but not all. But apparently this horror film is actually impacting a lot of people. A lot of people coming out of this film having a lot of positive things to say. And with $10 million and the film only costing about $4 million to actually make, this will probably end up being a pretty good moneymaker for A24. And it also goes to show you that, hey, companies like Disney, maybe you should start making some lower budgeted movies that actually appeal to a certain audience or demographic, instead of the type of crap that you've been doing recently where you are just not making anything, in fact losing massive amounts of money. Speaking of massive amounts of money, let's go ahead and talk about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, making only $4 million, dropping 40%. But hey, 720 screens, it fell from dropping 40%. It's not terrible as far as drops are concerned. And in fact, if you look at the overall dropping, this movie is now, compared to its first 2 weeks, at around that 70% range. And so this movie's actually doing historically what most films do, right? Most films tend to fall somewhere where their first 2 weeks account for either 70 or 50% of the entire box office. Sometimes you have chart breakers in both the negative and the positive. A positive direction would be a film that made only 30% of its entire box office in the first 2 weeks, meaning it made crap tons of money after the fact. Top Gun Maverick is a great example of that. Avatar: The Way of Water also did that too. Whereas this movie right now is actually closer to the higher end, around 70%. So therefore, it means it's not having historic drop-offs in the long term. And this has been very interesting, is that Disney, for both Indiana Jones and also for Elemental, much more so with Elemental than with Indiana Jones, has actually seen stronger holds down the stretch than anything else, right? So these films have actually done better than what had been expected. Elemental more so than Indiana Jones, but still interesting nonetheless that it's, again, both Disney movies that are seeing that. Some people might try to find a conspiracy as to explain how that happened. For me, I just think of it more as a lot of negative press and negative reactions, and then eventually you get to the point where people say, well, you know what? There's something I don't know what to see at the box office. Oh, there's an Indiana Jones film. I heard it wasn't good. Let me go ahead and check that out. That could very well be a reason as to why that is the case. Either way, though, it's still going to be the biggest financial loss of this year, because we know the film cost at least $400 million to make, and Lord knows they are nowhere close to making up the, again, well over $800 to $900 million worldwide that it would need to have to actually break even. And that's just to break even. So again, we're talking massive losses here. Elemental, though, again, still going to be financial loss, but not nearly as much as what it could have been. Insidious: Red Door at $3.1 million, dropping 52%. So this film is pretty much on the way out, but it's already made the money it needs to, so it's just nonstop profits at this point. And then Across the Spider-Verse, still in the top 10, dropping another 50%. dropping from another 800 screens from Sony, this film being out for 9 weeks, it's still marching along to where it could eventually actually cross that $700 million worldwide mark. It's not guaranteed, but it's looking a lot better. We already talked about Barbie's international numbers there at $774 million. Again, $1 billion is guaranteed. Oppenheimer at $400.3 million is also a film that is going to be ending its run, making a lot of money. Now, I don't know what the actual budget for this movie is, right? If you look at the numbers.com, let's see if they've updated that since. Actually, yes, they have. So initially, Oppenheimer was listed by the numbers as costing $180 million. Now, they were the only site that was actually reporting that. So I don't know exactly where they got that from, whether that was, I think I've heard some people say that Nolan mentioned it cost that amount of money, but the way it's being reported by pretty much everywhere is that it costs $100 million. I don't quite understand how it only costs that amount of money, because I know how much IMAX cameras cost, I know how much IMAX crew costs, I know how much IMAX film, and this has miles and miles and miles of IMAX film, including a brand new type of IMAX film that had never existed prior to this movie. I just can't believe it only costs $100 million to actually make. Regardless of that, though, the film is still doing very well. Right now, it's 4 times its budget. Typical break even is going to be between 2.5 and 3. So this film, well on its way to adding to its profits. And just like with Barbie, we'll have hundreds of millions in net gain profits. Though obviously Barbie going to have a lot more down the road. Haunted Mansion at $33.2 million. As I mentioned before, this film is set to be a pretty massive flop. At $33.2 million, it costs $150 million. It's just nowhere close to the amount of money it needs to actually make. Right? The production budget that they are reporting at the numbers is 157. The number that I've seen is closer to 150. At only 0.2 times the actual budget, and with not likely a lot of return visits based on the reviews that I have seen for this movie and the lack of any real craze or any real excitement for the film, I think this is going to be yet another massive loss for Disney. Sound of Freedom, again, right now only domestic, but will be opening internationally in certain countries over the next couple of months. They had a press release on their website, so if you're interested in finding out when it might be coming to your country, go check out angel.com. They have a press release there about where the film will be getting released. But hey, very, very impressive. And again, massive return on investment for the people involved. Mission Impossible, as I mentioned, it is doing a lot better internationally than it is domestically. But the fact that it is still holding very well in both markets. So this film is going to be legging out. And again, look at this market right here. Even though the film is not coming in nearly where we thought it was going to because of the positive reactions and because of how good the film actually is, the film is actually still not underperforming as far as the actual historical standard. So this, over at box office, over at the numbers, this takes the last 5 years. Based on the opening weekend numbers, where does the film likely end up? Now again, this is still not great news for the movie because remember, it had a weird opening weekend. It opened technically on like the Sunday and Monday prior. It had a full release, I believe, on the Tuesday, Wednesday of the week versus the Thursday. And so you're seeing this film, I think, suffer from that very odd release schedule. But it is nice to know that there is still some fire behind this movie, not nearly to the same degree as Barbenheimer by far, but enough to where this film is absolutely in the discussion for being able to make a lot more back than what initially was thought. Talk to Me, this horror film out right now, $10 million. Again, very impressive there. Indiana Jones, Dial of Destiny, only at $356 million, so maybe it gets to $400 million, maybe. But again, the $300 million budget we know has already been changed. We know that it's already been clarified to, and actually, no, probably closer to $400 plus million. Could even be a lot more than that when we find out next year from the UK tax returns what they actually spent on the movie. But this film, a far cry from the 2.5 times billion, sorry, the 2.5 times multiplier it needs to break even. And again, some would have that even closer to 3 times the budget. And at $400 million, oh boy, it becomes even worse than that. Elemental is getting close to $400 million worldwide. As you can see, again, this is something that I mentioned before. This film is actually doing a lot better than what had been expected. This film has had a lot of very strong holds in both the domestic and international, especially in the international. And again, based on the $200 million production budget, it's at 2 times its budget right now. So that's why, again, I don't think it's going to have enough gas in the tank to break even, but the fact that it's going to be making a lot more money than what had initially been thought is very, very impressive. So again, kudos to them, but still a loss for Disney. Insidious, $174.3 million. Again, still adding to the profits there. And Spider-Verse is now at $682 million, which is why I still think, even though this is definitely on the last legs of its theatrical run, $700 million worldwide is definitely a possibility. All right, let's go ahead and go to the charting because we love doing charting here over at OMB Reviews. Let me go ahead and actually do this live because we love to do things live over at OMB Reviews to get these the right size. There we go. I noticed this in my Geeks and Gamers video, and I want to make sure that that was correct. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So Barbie, let's start there. All right, at 2 weeks total of $774 million. That means based on historical trends. So for those that don't know, the way I got this chart created years ago was I said, hey, I wonder how the first 2 weeks of a box office, if it's a good way of being able to predict what a film will make by the end of its run. And I know that there's different metrics that people will ultimately use to try to figure these things out. But one of the things that I noticed in doing this historical research was, hey, most films end up making either 70% of their entire box office in the first 2 weeks or 50%. So either they double the entire amount they've made in 2 weeks by the end of the run, or they have some decent drop-offs, and they are able to still account for 70% of their entire box office and, again, still be able to get to a certain amount of money. Well, based on these numbers, right, we're looking at a worst-case scenario. Keep in mind, what are the drops and what are the holds right now for Barbie? 30% internationally, 40% domestically. So the chances of it only being 70% of the entire total is not likely. The film is holding too strong for it to be this minimum. But let's say it did. Let's say somehow down the line it ends up having massive drop-offs that makes up for the amount of money it's been holding and doing well so far. A worst-case scenario for this movie then would be $1.1 billion. Worst case scenario, which is still also over $400 and almost $450 million in net gain profits for the film after you take out spending on the budget and on the marketing. So huge return on investment in a worst case scenario. But let's say that holds continue. Let's say it continues every week after to hold in the 30s range internationally, continues to hold in the 40s range domestically. Okay, now we're talking about the film having a better chance at $1.5 billion. And what does that mean? That means now we're talking about the film putting up competition against the biggest film so far of this year, which of course would be the Super Mario Brothers movie. Just to give a little bit of a reference there back to that, right? So that film, I will say first off, right, that movie, Super Mario Brothers, was at $683 million after the first 2 weeks. So just to give you a bit of frame of reference there, right? This movie in the Barbie film is doing that much better than where Super Mario was. And Super Mario had a very strong second week and had even stronger weeks, with the weeks that followed it, right? So this film is doing very well. Now, Super Mario Brothers, that had a range between $976 and $1.3 billion. That film ended up being almost a chart breaker. It ended up making around $1.3 billion. In fact, let me go ahead and see if I can double check that, because it could have been a while since I updated the numbers here. Because this, of course, will be a huge change. As you all know, I love to do things live to give you my thoughts and the way I get to my thoughts and my conclusions in real time. So that way, if anyone needs to be critical, you can be critical and have all the information in front of you. Or also you can, just be a nice person. But based on that, and if memory serves, I think that this number is actually correct. Okay, now we're talking about how I think Barbie has a very good chance then of being, if it holds the way it is right now, if it continues to hold the way it is right now, could end up being the highest grossing film of the year. Again, I take that into account to say, well, if Barbie is at $774 million worldwide after 2 weeks, and you look at where Super Mario was, being at $680 after 2 weeks, okay, that's a huge advantage. And the holds that Barbie is seeing is very, very strong, right? We already know it had the biggest opening weekend of the year so far, but now it's having, again, an amazing second weekend as well. As you can see right now, the numbers is failing me. The numbers is just not wanting to do much of anything. And so I'm going to go ahead and have to just assume that is the case. Let me try one more thing. And again, we love to do things live here. Let's see if maybe clicking on this will actually help. Let me see, Super Mario Brothers film, and boom, yeah, $1.3 billion. There you go. So Super Mario Brothers, $1.3 billion. Oh boy. Yeah, so domestically, 351 versus the final for Super Mario, which was 574. We're talking about this movie Barbie being able to give it a run for its money. Internationally, same thing, 423 right now after 2 weeks. Super Mario ended at 781. So yeah, now I'm not even just saying that the film is, it's already guaranteed to make $1 billion, but now I'm saying I think there's a good chance for Barbie to actually beat. So the reason why I say that is because at $1.3 billion for Super Mario, which is still impressive, and it's nothing going to take away, right? If Barbie ends up being number one, that takes nothing away from the Super Mario Brothers film. Though it is interesting that in both cases, you've got a doll, right? You got a doll in the pop culture film getting over $1 billion, the highest grossing film of the year, and then second highest grossing film of the year at that situation would be based off of a video game character. It's a very weird world to live in, to say the very least, especially if you've seen the Barbie film and you know what kind of garbage is in there. But $1.3 billion is the average of what I expect the film to make. So if the film has massive drops, you're still looking at $1.1 billion, second highest grossing film of the year most likely, but you're more likely to see this between $1.3 and $1.5 billion. And keep in mind, there are some films that are chart breakers, meaning that they make even more than this 50% threshold, right? And so with that in mind, yeah, Barbie is well on its way to being, if not the highest grossing film of the year, one of the highest grossing films. And I think it's going to give it a run for its money at the very least when it comes to the Super Mario Brothers film. As far as profits are concerned, that would mean a profit range between $450 million and $700 million in net gain profits. And again, Mattel probably will end up getting about 50% of those net profits. But regardless of that, that is going to be a huge win for Warner Brothers, as they need those hundreds of millions to make up for the massive losses that they have had so far this year. Will it be enough to make up for it? I don't think, especially after they split the money with Mattel. But hey, it'd be interesting to see what happens with Warner Brothers. Oppenheimer, $400 million there. This is a Universal release with Nolan working with them now. With $400 million historically, that means I expect the film to make somewhere between $570 and $800 million by the end of its run. So same thing. If it has similar drops as Barbie is seeing right now, you could see this film getting closer to $800 million, which would be insanely impressive for a film, as I mentioned previously, a 3-hour drama film that typically would not be this kind of huge moneymaker, making as much money as it is. Of course, it has the IMAX theaters probably for another couple weeks or so because of the deals made with Nolan. But hey, this would ultimately lead to the film getting somewhere between $200 and $330 million in net gain profits. So hey, good choice by Nolan, it seems, to switch companies away. However, Warner Brothers is not too sad either to be having Barbie at this same point in time. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 at $447 million is still $166 million in the red. Just to give a frame of reference here to the actual percentage, right now it's at 83% compared to its first 2 weeks. So right now the first 2 weeks account for 83% of the entire total. What that tells me is that this film is still moving along at a decent enough clip where it's going to fall at the very least within the range that I had initially had given for the film. So the wheels are not falling off this movie. So that means for Mission Impossible, we can expect the film to end somewhere between 529 and 741. We're not seeing numbers to the extent where 741 is the most likely scenario, but it's enough to where we could definitely say that whereas it'll be a loss, it'll definitely not be as big of a loss as something akin to Disney or Warner Brothers when it comes to films like The Flash, or in the case of Disney, a film like Indiana Jones, Dial of Destiny. Looking at Joyride, still don't have a budget for this movie, so I don't even think I updated the actual box office for that yet because it's just not looking good. Sound of Freedom, again, massive profits, massive returns on investments for this movie, so kudos to them. Insidious 5 at, again, right there at the cusp of a typical movie, right? A typical film. So this movie is going to be performing what a usual film will make. It's not having the best drops in the world, but hey, it's adding to its profits. And when it comes to other films, I can talk about Indiana Jones, still $236 million in the red, and that is using the $300 million marker there. So keep in mind that if the film actually costs $400 million, as some places are now reporting it actually did, we're talking about $386 million in the red. So a $300 million loss, that is one of the biggest numbers I think I've ever seen for financial losses at this point in time. But those are the numbers as they stand. Check out my chart over at OMB Reviews if you want to have OMBReviews.com, if you want to have more insights into how other films are doing. But also in the comment section below, do you think that the Barbie film is going to hit $1 billion in 2 days, 3 days, a full week? Again, it's going to hit it sometime this week, either before the weekend or after. And also, what do you think the end's going to be? Do you think it's going to beat Mario? I think right now, the way it's tracking, it has a very good chance to beat Mario as the highest grossing film of the year, getting upwards of 1.4, could be even $1.5 billion. And also, do you think that Oppenheimer is going to have a incredible run? It already has it, but do you think that that's going to get close to the $800 million range that it is, again, potentially able to get based on the current metrics in front of us? And also, lastly, with Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, do you think that there might be still some life for that movie? I think that there is, just not to the extent that it would need to actually be successful. But hey, glad to see that even dropping over 1,000 plus theaters was still actually able to hold as well as it did domestically and internationally. But let me know your thoughts about any of these things I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, like the follow button, smash the rumble button. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above, starting off first with my members over on Patreon: Father Luca Illick, Hymir Irie Hymason, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Chat Reviews, check out his YouTube channel by the same name, Laura, the Monomator General's Story, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name as well. To my subscribe star peeps, Zion Voders, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name. Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, The Beer Guru, and the K-Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, and Robert Barnes, the amazing lawyer. So thank you all very much for being my supporters at the Keep It the Bifrost level and above. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, go ahead and check out that top link in the video description below to find out ways to sign up to support the channel and to be able to get access to things like the shoutouts, but also to giveaways. I have an exclusive giveaways channel on my Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff, and also access to an exclusive podcast that I do once or twice a month, depending on what I'm able to get accomplished, especially over the course of this crazy, crazy busy summer. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.